Let me now introduce to you Professor Mina Fazel. Mina works for OUH in the Children's Psychological Medicine team. She also works with Oxford University. She's a clinician and researcher with a significant interest in children's mental health and schools. Mina.
Thank you for inviting me, Helen. This is a very exciting opportunity where my two worlds actually come together. So I'm a consultant child psychiatrist working at the Children's Hospital, but I mainly do research, and my research is really into how do we as mental health services reach the most vulnerable populations, and it's not really clear that we're doing that in traditional services. So I've been asked to talk a little bit about what's going on and what's the evidence base for doing this, but I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about kind of a little bit about childhood. We all know it, but I always like to review it, what's kind of happening, why it's important for us to think about this together. Then a little bit about the unique role of schools or the evidence base, and then a little bit about what can be done. I think I'll also just contextualize this, it is an incredibly interesting and exciting moment to be thinking about schools and mental health, because the government is really interested as well. So there's a new green paper out, I don't know whether we know this, about developing a school mental health task force. So individuals who we don't know where they sit, we're not sure if they're going to be employed by health or education, but they're very clearly going to sit between the two. And every school, which is the vision of the green paper, will have one of these workers working to kind of address the mental health needs of the school. So it's not teachers and it's not kind of the mental health thing, but this kind of thing, this new tranche of workers coming in the middle. Over 2,000 are planned to be employed over the next few years. So really watch this space. There's a lot of interest. All those kind of documents you were showing for the Department of Education, it's really interesting that these silos are really frustrating. So I work with the Department of Education on quite a number of committees. I still don't know about some of those things. So Department of Health, Department of Education are these two separate entities, and it's actually that trickles down into the way that we've all been working. But I suppose now is a time, there's enough interest and enough concern that we're trying to bring these two together. So I suppose with my research hat on, I think we can't do it unless we all kind of consent to being studied a bit and to filling out these questionnaires and to monitoring it as well. Because given the fact that we've all been at school, as a researcher, the data on which we're basing the evidence is absolutely shocking. There's absolutely nothing of good, robust quality out there. I can probably leave, that's the end of my talk, because you want me to talk about the evidence base. I'm saying that it's very, very poor. Now, there's a whole range of reasons why that is, that I won't bore you with, but I'm just telling you that we just can't carry on like this. So we're working really hard to find ways to bring the data that's held on the National Pupil Database together with what we hold in the electronic patient record, because there's just so much information there that if we were able to marry the two together and learn from, we'd actually be able to understand a lot more about trajectories. I'm really interested in, how can we identify those that are most likely to need input later and to intervene early. We're doing quite a few interesting studies in schools, so if you're at a school, you're interested to be part of this, do get in touch with me, email me afterwards. I've got one of my master's students here who's going to be recruiting kind of for a really interesting peer intervention study. So we actually just can't progress unless we start to kind of do a good bit of robust research in this area as well. Okay, what happens in childhood and adolescence? Well, as we know, this little child has to manage all these really complicated things in quite a short period of time. I was just thinking, I've got to go to a wedding next week, and I remember his parents getting together, and this boy's now finished university and getting married. Actually I don't think, he should really be this big, but actually he's managed all these really complex tasks it feels like a blink of an eye. So, in this very short period of time, kids have to negotiate kind of family life, emotionally controlling their behaviour, get to learn all these things. They've got to also work out what to do with peers and peer relationships and what type of person they're going to be in that, and they physically develop at the same time, and they've got to learn a moral code alongside that. And then I suppose the whole task of this is what we call individuation, to actually separate from your family and become an individual. Now, all of these tasks need to take place at quite a short period of time, and so we get what I've put as a big cloud. So what are some of the additional complexities that we see young people in the modern age dealing with? So there's puberty, so this actually, I didn't know this until recently, but we're the only organism that does this thing called puberty. All other animals grow along a linear path, so they become a child till adult and it's linear. Humans have this thing called puberty where suddenly there's this exponential growth, not only physically, but what we're learning also in the brain as well. So we used to think all the development of the brain took place till age 5. Now we know as much happens between the ages of 12 and 24. This whole concept of synaptic pruning, so the brain deciding what is needed going forward and what isn't. So it's incredibly crucial, all these things that are taking place in puberty. And alongside massive change, you get major exposure and vulnerability to those things going wrong. Sleep. Like everyone is talking about how no one's sleeping, none of us are probably sleeping, but definitely kids aren't sleeping as well. And what does this mean and how is it going to be impacting? Family discord, we know this is a major long-term risk factor. And a whole range of factors, I suppose, compromising the kind of traditional family unit as we know, and what that does and how that impacts on children and adolescents developing. We don't know. This whole pressure to perform, I'm not going to talk about it because you all have to make sure that bit happens. No. So, what is going on with all this testing? So I said to my daughter recently, she's 11, I don't care how you do it at school. It's really unimportant to me what your grades are. So then she recently got a really terrible report. I went, okay, so I don't care how you do it at school, but you need to pretend to your teachers that you care. So it's actually just finding the right, sorry teachers, so it's just finding the right way to balance the message as a parent. So yeah, I'll experiment on all my kids and I'll finally maybe work out what's the right message eventually. So then we've got austerity. So this really complicated thing that's happened since 2007, who knows what will happen if Brexit happens with it, but the complication of austerity and poverty and how that impacts not only in the individual level on families and parents' ability to work and provide and nutrition, but also just societal and kind of the pressures that puts on services that are provided to vulnerable families and children across the board. And then finally, social media. I'm no expert on it, but the problem is austerity and social media all seem to happen around the same time in 2007. So we don't really understand what's going on, but I think we need to watch this space. A lot of good comes out of social media, but there are a lot of complications and vulnerabilities that emerge as well. So thinking about mental illness, when does it start? Well, you know what? It's all happening when you're at school. All major mental illness is basically starting in the school years. And so if we haven't got this component of school and mental health right, I think we're going to have major long-term consequences of it. So I would say the mid-teens are the key moment that we need to be kind of saying, if we haven't got these structures working, we know that a lot of mental illness gets missed or is treated much later. So you've got severe disorders often preceded by less severe disorders that I'm putting as untreated. So there's a strong continuity, especially with depression. So really the major disorders that we're thinking about are anxiety and depression. They're the major long-term public health problems. So we see a lot of anxiety in childhood, coming in puberty as well. And then from puberty onwards, the depressive disorders starting. What we're learning about the long-term trajectories are that, in a way, depression's the one that we really need to be concerned about. So that those young people that are starting to get depressed in adolescence are much more likely to have a long-term life course negative trajectory. And this is just an interesting study that came out recently looking at what we call the iceberg effect. So what we see in services is only the tip of this massive iceberg of what's going on in communities, and schools know about this. They're dealing with this all the time as all of these other people in the community that aren't presenting to services, which is why schools are really important because they're not coming to services, but they are at school. And what do we know about the relationship between education and mental health? Well, there's an important relationship. If you have a mental health problem, primarily, your educational attainment is likely to suffer. And if you have an educational problem, primarily, a specific learning difficulty, that you're likely to have secondary mental health problems. So there's an incredibly close interrelationship between the two. What I'm interested in is bridging that gap, because actually those that have mental health problems and those that are seen in services are really not the same. So what proportion, the government produced the statistics last week, what do you think, what number of kids are seen in services who actually have a need to be seen? Sorry? So of the 1 in 8, what proportion are being seen in services? So you picked up the 1 in 8, well done. So, a bit better than 10%, a bit better than 10%. What do we think? Sorry? 20? A little bit higher than 20? 25, I'll give you the answer, 25%. So 25% of kids that need to be seen by services are currently being seen by services. Now the government plan over the next 5 years is that increases from 25% to what do you think the government wants to increase it to? Sorry? 35%. So like let's just remove the word mental illness here and let's change it with diabetes. Now, would anybody think it's acceptable that 25% of kids with diabetes are treated and that it's an appropriate goal that 35% end up getting treated? So this is where people like me get really angry. This is called the whole component of parity of esteem. Why is it acceptable in mental illness when we know the long-term negative trajectories on physical health, on everything, are so negative? Why is it acceptable to not be actually having a much stronger goal than that? But anyway, so we are really at the tip of the iceberg. So this is the data that came out last week. 12%, or as you said, 1 in 8. So this is the data of the. So the last time we did the statistical epidemiological study was 13 years ago. It's very exciting. They've done it. Came out last week. I'm just simplifying it for you. 12% of the UK child population has a diagnosable mental disorder. Of those 12%, I want you to look at that little bit of grey at the bottom. Those are the ones that also have a limiting long-term illness. So this is why this is important, because a really important proportion of the full population of children with mental health problems, that's 25.9% to be precise, of all those that have a mental health problem, have also a comorbid long-term physical health problem. If you take physical health problems broadly, which is what they also did, so you look at issues like obesity, and you look at a certain number of specific learning problems as well, then it's 75% of those that have a mental disorder also have these other comorbid problems. So this is why what we're doing today and thinking about is really important, because when we're thinking about mental health problems and we're thinking of the group we need to think about, those with the physical health problems and the range of limiting physical disorders are really important for us to be thinking about and addressing. So what do we know about school? Well, your teachers are incredibly busy, very, very difficult job. And we're learning more and more about the relationship between teachers and students. So exit interviews with teachers show that many of them who leave the profession, and many of them do leave the profession, I think you're the most important resource, teachers. We want to keep you all in the profession. 50% leave within 5 years of completion. Why? Many of them say in their exit interviews it isn't because they don't know how to teach, it's because of the emotional behavioural difficulties that are presenting in the classroom. And often it's 1 or 2 children that have tipped them out of the profession. So that's where I think this joint working is really important, because actually I want to know what 1 or 2 kids those are, and I think it's our job to be helping that in mental health services. So there's also interesting data to show that if a teacher enters the classroom with signs of stress, for example, high cortisol levels, at the beginning of the day when they enter the classroom, the school classroom as a whole, the kids all will have high cortisol levels by the end of the day. So there's a very direct relationship between how a teacher is and how their pupils then manage. There's a whole thing of peers, good Lord, what happens at school is quite scary a lot of the time. So peers are really important, they're a great protective factor, but when it goes wrong, it can be really difficult. It's one of the most toxic long-term predictors of negative mental health. So the last week's data said about 45% of young people are saying that they've been bullied at school. That's incredibly high. Of the group that have major mental health problems, it's around 60 to 70%. So I often say at schools, if there's one thing you want to do for the mental health of the children, just sort out the bullying. And actually you'll have a major impact going forward. There's all this exam stuff. So I'll go on to what Helen's now asked me to talk about, which is the evidence base. So what is the unique role of schools? So I think schools provide a unique platform to access and support psychological difficulties in children and adolescents. And what I feel quite strongly is that the most powerful mental health interventions that I, as a mental health professional, want to deliver, I can't. But I actually think teachers in the classroom can, because the peer relationships are so important that actually in school, I can't prescribe doing something with your peers or doing a school project with your peers. I can't do that in a clinic. And, I can't, but actually in the school context, there's an opportunity to think about structured and unstructured time, about putting children together. You can step back, you can think who's in the classroom, which group of kids might be a good group for this kid. And you can do things that actually no one else can do, of kind of, saying, okay, these four, you do that project, and finding natural ways in an unobtrusive matter where you put young people together in a way that might build their self-esteem and their confidence that actually very few other routes can do. So I do feel that teachers, whether you like it or not, have the most powerful psychological interventions more readily available to them than those of us divorced from the school environment do. So when I say school-based mental health interventions, what do I mean? Well, first, there's the whole problem of who gives the school-based treatment or intervention. And what this shows is that you can go from inside the school to outside the school. There are a whole range of different individuals who might be giving an intervention. So peers, as I said, we're interested in studying peers. The whole pastoral supports, it's not everybody, it's just an idea. There's a whole pastoral support staff of schools. There are teachers, there are school counsellors, there are school nurses, there are school psychologists, there are a whole range of charities. And then the most extended, I'm saying, is you've got mental health services. So when you're talking about school-based interventions, first you need to think of that whole range of potential people or individuals giving the intervention. Then you need to think, to whom are you going to give the intervention? So is it to the whole school? Is it to whole years? Is it to whole classrooms? Is it to those pupils that are deemed at risk? Or is it those pupils that have been diagnosed with a specific problem? So the next step is to work out what you are going to do. Oops, I don't know what I just did, but that was fine. The next step is, what are you, having decided who and to whom, what exactly are you going to give? Is it going to be, these kind of highfalutin important things that we do called cognitive behavioural therapy or mindfulness, or is it just arranged behavioural interventions, or is it something around the arts, or is it counselling, or is it medication, or is it family therapy? What to do? So I think that complexity about just deciding which of those explains why the evidence base is so poor, because different things have been tried. But actually it's this person with this to that, so actually we've got very little that we can uniformly draw on, because so many, you name it, it's been tried in schools. But has it been replicated? Has it been tried in a large number of schools? Has it been tried in a relatively random way so that we can really confidently understand the impacts? I can confidently say no. So I think whatever you do, if you're going to do something, evaluate it. But actually, evaluate it reasonably well. Come and talk to us. We're happy to help anyone do anything. And then I put this kind of important prevailing issues that are there. So the whole issue of consent, if a kid wants to be, seen by a mental health service, who needs to know? Who needs to consent to it? Confidentiality, so, if a student says something in the classroom, who will, will it be shared with everyone if a teacher knows? So I did an interesting study. So we started a refugees service, a school-based refugee service quite a few years ago. And after that, I interviewed 40 students who'd been seen by the school-based mental health service of refugees because they were never coming up to the hospital, so we started it in the schools. I asked them afterwards, I said, asked them a range of things, and then I said, so tell me about confidentiality. Do you understand when you spoke to someone? Yeah, and they were all, I was really impressed, they were all really clearly able to describe what confidentiality meant and what the person they'd spoken to and the counsellor or the mental health professional, whoever it was, that had been explained to them in great detail. And then I asked them, did you believe them? And they all just went, no. So there's something about kind of, us saying, we're not going to tell anyone, but I suppose if you're working in a school environment where there's more fluidity, there's much more communication, does a student actually believe we're going to be working in confidence when we're in that environment? The evidence base, as I've hinted, is poor. And then whose responsibility is it? Is it the responsibility of health? Is it the responsibility of education? And because we seem to get stuck there, it feels like nothing gets moved, So if we're going to bring mental health services into schools, who pays? Is it health? Is it education? No one knows. So then, you know what? Let's just not do it. We find that schools do quite incredible things. Some schools employ counsellors. Some schools employ social workers. Some schools, have a lot of freedom, I think, and some have been incredibly innovative in what they do. We bring in the mental health service into the school goes, great, we don't need to employ a counsellor anymore, we'll do that. So actually you get all these kind of confusions around what's role, what responsibility, who pays, and then, it's really difficult. And I think that goes back to these two different departments, Department of Health, Department of Education. And so what do you do for that whole important area that we're all in about kind of trying to bring the two together? So, what do we know about types of school interventions? So I'm going to talk you through them. All right. So the first big tranche of interventions we have going into schools, mental health interventions, are around the promotion of mental well-being, really. So kind of supporting kind of good behaviour, good emotion, bullying prevention, all goes in this world of mental health promotion. So they're usually interventions that are given to almost everybody in the school. So these are kind of the whole school interventions, and they're kind of just promoting kind of, better self-coping skills. A whole range of different things have been tried under the banner of promotion. Promotion goes to everybody usually. And the evidence base for mental health promotion, I think, is pretty good. So a lot of these have been done, and they have reasonably good results. So you do it in big populations. If you just improve by a little bit, a tiny little bit, that gives you a positive result in these types of studies. So we sort of know that mental health promotion done by schools and the whole range of ways it's done is a good thing. There's a lot of good evidence out there. You can align what is done in schools with a whole range of good studies and good support that kind of indicates what that is, and I'll talk you through a little bit about that. The next wave we've got is we're kind of cutting down the numbers of students, and we're thinking about preventing major mental illness. So it's thinking about, we don't want any kids in our school ever to get depression. What can we do? So that's not really promoting kind of good coping or promoting a kind of safe school environment. That's more about, we don't want anyone to get this thing. That, I just want to say, is not a good goal for any school to have, because these aren't necessarily things that can be prevented in that kind of way. But anyway, so we want to prevent self-harm, or we want to, so this is kind of the whole world of mental health prevention. Now that's what everybody wants us to achieve. That's where everyone's interest is. Everyone wants us to prevent major mental illness. And prevention's been done in a range of ways, but I'm just going to tell you the byline. We've not got any good evidence for what prevents. Okay? And then the last bit is treatment. So it's how do we treat those that actually have a problem in schools. So if we've got a group of young people with major depression or with major anxiety disorders or who've experienced severe traumatic events, can we give interventions in schools, in classrooms or in groups to treat that? And I think the evidence base for that is quite good. So we've got these two areas of good evidence: treating, promoting, we don't really yet know confidently how best to prevent. So this is an example of mental health promotion, so social emotional learning programs, Mind Matters. Have any of you heard of these, Mind Matters or the Good Behaviour Game? So these are pretty, America's really big on this. I feel like I should say promotion with an American accent, because they really kind of do this kind of well. The Good Behaviour Game, I love really. It's kind of this primary school intervention where basically the classroom is split into three, and they have just life is a competition about being better, being good, and supporting each other in that. And it has reasonably good, so the emphasis is not on, let's stop this, so that it's like, it's about being good. And it's a sort of big school-wide competition about who can be good. So there's the whole health promoting schools, which the WHO has been very strong in promoting, which kind of just encourages schools to look at every level. So looking at the curriculum, looking at how the school's organised, and also looking at community links and partnerships. So we'll get to that later. Then prevention, so you've got, as I said, we don't really know what works. So there are these universal prevention things, so that basically means for everyone in the schools. There's quite an interesting study published last year in 8 countries around the world called the SAIL RCT. So it's looking at an intervention called the YAM intervention, which is a really specific intervention to stop self-harm. And it had actually incredibly positive results and findings. I'm involved peripherally in the Department of Education's studying of that in the UK, and we're coming across a lot of difficulties in rolling it out. So it's not quite clear what we should do. Then a whole range of other interventions. Friends for Life is one of them. Has anyone heard of Friends for Life? So this is an Australian program. It's been brought mainly to the Bath area. It's been studied mainly in the kind of northeast Somerset part of the British world anyway. So that's kind of bringing cognitive behaviour therapy to whole classes, doing kind of 10 one-hour lessons around cognitive behaviour therapy. And I don't actually think the results are that strongly proposing that that's the way to go, but it has been tried. And then these are kind of good evidence-based to treat in schools. I thought I'd tell you a little bit about what's happening in Oxford. So we've kind of been doing quite a bit of learning. So as I told you, I interviewed a lot of refugees about what did they prefer being seen at school or not. And 70% of them said they preferred to be seen by mental health services in schools than elsewhere. And I think that's probably about the right number, is what we kind of see across the board in more vulnerable populations. The majority of them prefer to be seen at school than in clinics, but there will be an important number who would rather, if you don't like school, you're not really going to want to be doing other things at schools. So why do they prefer to be seen at school? Well, most kind of felt it was convenient, they can get back to their lessons on time, they can find the therapist easily, but really it's that school felt safe. And it sort of makes sense, doesn't it? I want a young person to come and tell me some of the most difficult things that have happened to them in their lives. And I'm expecting them to leave the environment that they feel safe in, their home or their school or wherever that might be, come to a hospital, we were up a hill at that time, where they don't know anybody, come into a room with a stranger and then happily tell me that. That really just doesn't make any sense as to how that's going to encourage young people to trust that process and me and feel kind of supported in that environment. So this is one of the voices of the kids. It's good to have it in school. If I come to hospital, it's scary. I don't know if I would go if it was in a hospital. No one likes hospital, except for Helen and I, because we choose to work in one, but mostly. And I did a bit of a study training teachers in some of the most commonly used psychotherapeutic skills we use in our practice. Could I distill this into a 1-2 hour session just teaching teachers skills and seeing if they use them? So this is one of the skills I taught them, which we called the treasure box, about helping a young person think about how they look after themselves. So asking the young person to think, what kind of things do you have in your box to help you, whether it's a real box or an imagined box or whatever it is. And so just talking through and teachers about this, and what I found was that with the range of different tools that I taught teachers, actually, I interviewed them 3 to 6 months after that with 1-2 hour training. And in that very little thing, quite a lot of tools were being used by the teachers afterwards. So mainly I did a lot on sleep and relaxation, and those were used a lot. And I asked students how many kids were using them with, and 20% were using them with 5 or more kids over that period of time. So actually we're getting kind of, we need to learn about how we can find ways to get the more common interventions out there. You might be hearing a little bit more about what's happening in Oxfordshire CAMS, but we started off with a CAMS in-reach service where a mental health worker was going into the state-funded secondary schools of Oxfordshire for half a day a week. So what we found that schools a big school might have 30 kids being seen by CAMS. Those 30 kids were often being seen by, maybe 30 different CAMS workers. So the school as a whole wasn't able to build a relationship with CAMS about the issues they're dealing with. It was much more on an individual level. So we thought, can we change that? Can we get the same person going into the same school on a regular basis every week to try and start building kind of a better relationship? Initially we wanted to do one-to-one therapy, but as the service has now been commissioned to all the schools of Oxfordshire, now it's much more around consultation, liaison and training, and it's kind of thinking about what we need. But actually a lot of the barriers are really improving around how we're working in schools. And I do want to say, Oxfordshire is the only place in the country where we do have those links, nowhere else. We're being watched, everyone wants to learn. So when we were asking the CAMS workers what they were doing, a lot of them were talking with individuals or doing therapy, but the areas of need were mainly around emotional problems. And what CAMS workers felt their impact was really around giving useful advice to staff and helping staff, what we call containment. So really just to say, look, this is the right thing to do, don't worry, we're here, we're coming back next week, you can feedback back to us, try this. So really just, really positive learning around how the more we work together, the more actually we can actually help young people. And it's not necessarily very intensive. It might not be saying, do this, it's about kind of, this is right, don't worry. What are some of the challenges? Well, a lot around ethics. If anyone knows me, that's just my pet interest right now. Screening, should we start screening? And we're actually going to be, in the next few days, actually trying to get a massive screening program started in Oxford, which will be quite interesting. How we work with pastoral care systems within schools, existing ones. Sometimes they feel threatened. Sometimes, we don't, that's a real shame, but that has happened. So how do we build relationships in a way that is supportive? So I will spend my last 10 minutes just talking about kind of a little bit about what we could be done just on the kind of general issues. So there are lots of policy and practice implications. So I did a big study. We looked at the 8 largest school programs in the world. So, looking at what's been published on these 8 largest ones, they've reached approximately 28 million children over the last decade. So a lot is being done in this space, not necessarily in England yet, but a lot globally. So the promotion types of interventions are the largest ones that have been done. PBIS, no one's heard of it? There's been a big trial in Manchester around PBIS. It's the largest by far, and it's really thinking not really around individual kids, but much more systemically around a school, the culture, the whole support network there. And that has shown kind of improved reading scores and fewer suspicions in the schools that it's been in. Friends, that I've mentioned briefly, second largest, gone to 8 million children have received this in 12 countries around the world. I can send you this if you want, but that just shows you kind of all the different types of interventions and who's doing it. But what do we know in summary about it? So of these larger studies, 6 were delivered, of the 8 largest, 6 were delivered by trained teachers. 2 of them were embedded in the school curriculum. A few were tailor-made or had been adapted from existing ones, and they include a lot of them include the health promotion, which I've put as tier 1, with then targeted things into the areas they're worried about to prevent. And this is what I think, and I'm sorry, you'll get the slides, so you can look at the details, but I'll talk you through it. So these are the factors that we think impact on the quality of mental health interventions in school mental health. So there are individual factors, so about the professional delivering it, how they perceive the intervention being done. There's the team level. So I think what happens is we just stop at the individual level. But I just think, no, we have to really think about the team level, about staff being supported in what they do, their expertise, how the kind of teams function. And then there's a school level. Do schools value this? Do they put resources into it? Do they support it? Is it part of the mission statement of a school? Is there leadership? Buy-in from the school? What are the characteristics of the school that can help it in the culture and the fit of what's being done with that school? These are really important levels. And then the whole macro level around kind of what's happening in the wider community and society. For example, the context we're in, as I explained, in the UK right now, which is a good one. So I think if we're thinking about interventions for children in schools, I'm very proud of this slide, so I just want you to spend a long time looking at it and wondering how I made it, because it took a So we've got the child we're worried about for whatever reason. They've got major physical health problems, they've missed the last 2 terms of school, no one's talking to them. We can't think of this child independent of a whole range of factors in the school around the teachers, the environment, the learning. But, we have to be thinking hand in hand with the family. Especially as you get older kids, the involvement of family becomes less and less. And I was recently at a meeting with Ofsted. I didn't realise it was such a bad word, but anyway, so Ofsted Chief Inspector and 8 other people were there, and then 4 of us were advising them about mental health and whether they should be incorporating mental health measures into the Ofsted as well. That's obviously what I think they need to do, but they weren't that convinced. And I suppose part of my argument to them was, are schools ever assessed in how they engage with families? Because actually, if we want to be thinking about the well-being of kids, we can't be doing that independent of some structured way to actually also consider the needs or the role of school in that. So my argument is, society is quite complicated right now. All these kind of institutions that were there, it used to be churches, everyone used to go to church, and they haven't really in my lifetime, but before my life, so it used to be churches, it used to be a whole range of other structures, all seem to have less and less influence. And what institution is taking that place? Well, there's nothing. But I think it's schools are going to be. Because actually that's the only kind of structure that seems to be in a community that all kids are going to, that families sometimes naturally congregate towards. If we don't actually facilitate, doesn't mean teachers need to do it, but actually it means how do we think really about schools and the responsibility they might be having towards the broader community as well. See, it's just an excuse to keep this slide on for longer. Anyway, so we've also got peers that we need to be thinking about the community, and I think it's impossible for us to be thinking about the needs of a child and the school without that kind of whole system. That's just for the government. So what to do? Let's identify problems early. Let's reduce the duration where mental health problems aren't addressed. Let's support teachers to do that. They need it. They're the most valuable resource we have if we're worried about the next generation. Let's think about vulnerable populations. As the data shows, these are children with lifelong illnesses, are a major component in the latest study of those with mental illness. Don't forget the importance of school belonging. This is it's one of the most kind of consistent findings, that if a child feels they belong in their school, their long-term mental health outcomes are much better. Their current mental health outcomes and their long-term mental health. Hence my going to my daughter, don't worry about your academics, just enjoy school. Obviously the wrong message as a parent, but we'll learn. Implementation focus is just me thinking, if you're going to do anything, think about, can this be done everywhere? Actually, can other schools do this? What are we learning? How can we share? Quickly about teachers, lots of kind of teacher preparation programs, prevent burnout. There's a lot of kind of learning across the world, not necessarily in the UK, about this. And preparedness through kind of programs that you've been running around training that I think is very important. I think we need to target known risk factors. As I've said, health problems are one of them. Bullying, major, family discord, early puberty. I came from a refugee research background, so obviously those that are displaced communities. And don't forget the importance of focusing on school belonging, interpersonal relationships, emotional regulation. So in conclusion, adolescent mental health, I think, is really important. We need to be thinking about secondary schools in a new way. I think there's been a lot of important focus on primary schools, but there's poor conceptualisation around secondary schools. I think schools play an important role because they can democratise access to services for all children. All kids, almost all kids, go to school. So if we're going to provide services, mental health type services, we need to be going in schools because they're not coming to hospitals. But we can think about schools as a way to refer into services and make sure it's part of a system. So I'm going to stop with a question for you because it's just my interest. I want to know from you, if a child, let's say this child is 13, wants to see your visiting mental health worker, and they don't want their parents to know, I just want your hands up if you think the parents should be informed. 13, they should? Should? And more people are nodding than putting their hands up. So put your hands up if you think the parents of a 13-year-old need to know if a child wants to be seen by a mental health worker and the child doesn't want their parents to know. All right. I think that's about half of you. Who in the school needs to know? This kid doesn't want anyone at school to know. They've told one teacher. They don't want anyone else to know. Is that all right? No, says the head teacher. I love it. Do you agree with the head teacher? Who needs to know? Safeguarding. They've got a mild anxiety. Okay, so this is before they're seeing the mental health worker. Do they need to tell anyone then? No. Is that... What do you think? He's not sure. Put your hands up if they can see the mental health worker without any other person in school knowing for the first time. All right, yay. Okay. Sorry, that was just me doing an aside for my own interest. All right. So I think we can go on. I just want you to know that there's a post that we've produced that's free to download. You can find it on my website. I can give it to whatever. That is, we've made for schools to put up on school boards around how young people can help themselves with their low mood, just telling them what it looks like, and then ways that they can help themselves, and then places they can get more help from, and then the schools can put in their teacher that they want there. So that's free, that's available. The Charlie Wolof Trust can also send it to you if you want it, but please provide kind of information. Some schools are emailing this out to kids, whatever. It's there and it's for you to use. So there are lots of people that I'd like to thank, but mainly all of you for listening, so thank you.